Hello and happy World Cardmaking Day, everyone. It's Laureen from the Paper and Ink Boutique, and I'm here to walk you through how I created this card for World Cardmaking Day. This is one of 4 cards that I designed for World Cardmaking Day using some of the ephemera that was included in our World Cardmaking Day kits that was available to purchase from the store. I'll show you the other products that I've used, but please remember that these cards that we've all created are intended to inspire. So you may or may not have all of the other products that we've used to create our cards, but please know there's many other options that you could use of things that you probably already have in your stash, and I'll give some suggestions as we go through this card. I'll talk about the products that I did use specifically for this card in case you're interested. So first of all, the frame that I've used here is from Spellbinders. Now this particular one is from the Fluted Classics Rectangles die set. But we just also received a very similar style with the fluted edges, but there's multiple dies within the set as well. And it's called the Linear Touch Rectangles and Tag Etched dies. So you may want to check that one out. We just got it into the store at the end of September. And there's also a similar die set from Prism Studio, and it is called So Many Rectangles. And included in that, and this is a really interesting collection, is this larger rectangular frame, and it's got some really nice etching in there. So let's see if we can get the camera to focus on that. There we go. And there's all sorts of smaller ones with different etching patterns. So this is a really cool set as well. This frame size is a little bit smaller than the one that's through Spellbinders, but it would still work really great as well. I also used Waffle Flowers Quatrefoil panel die and textured die, and those are a really great set. They come as separate. So there's the panel die, and this is the texture die, and I'll go through how I use those in a moment. And then I also, for the hexagon piece, I guess if you will, is from, again, a Spellbinders, and it's the Emerald Cut Labels and Tag. This is a really great set. I love this one. I know Brianna uses it a lot as well. And I just use this simple little die, okay? I've also used Catherine Pooler die inks. I've used Succulent, which I thought was quite appropriate given the nature of the ephemera. Got Cashmere, and I also used some Distress Oxide in Pumice Stone. I've used some Versamark ink and some clear embossing powder from Ranger, just used a super fine detail. And then either a Nouveau Crystal Drops, this is in Morning Dew, or Glossy Accents, one of the two. And I'll show you the difference between those two. And then the star of the show, of course, is the Simply Stated Design ephemera and Sentiment. And this ephemera is from the Floral Academia Terrarium ephemera, and then the Sentiment is from the Floral Academia Essentials ephemera. So it includes a number of tags and circle die cuts and a lot of different sentiments. So I thought these ephemera pieces were really beautiful and wanted to use those. So, and we carry so many different packages of ephemera from Simply Stated at the store that I wanted to show how you could just use an ephemera piece and create your own backgrounds to highlight it. So I know the kit includes a number of pattern papers as well, which I've also used in the other 3 cards I've created, but this one was just to highlight how you can use pieces of ephemera to really stand out on its own. So again, you may or may not have all these pieces. This is probably one of the more involved cards of the 4 that I designed, but really still very simple and straightforward to do, just multiple steps involved. Okay, with that said, let's get started. So I've used a standard A2 sized card base, which I started with a piece of white cardstock that measures 8.5 by 5.5, and I've scored it at 4.25 along the 8.5 side. So that's a standard A2 sized card. And then I've also used 2 different A2 sized, again, 4.25 by 5.5 inch white card panels. And I've also used a A2 sized black cardstock, and then just using some scraps, I also have cut out a black panel as well, and I'll talk about how I created that one. So you may have to use a little bit extra cardstock from your stash, but I think everybody should have some white cardstock and black cardstock in your stash, hopefully. Okay, so in order to ink our background, so what I'm going to be working on first is the very, very background. So you can see that it's been inked. So I've used the pumice stone, cashmere, and succulent inks on this. So I'm going to go through how I ink that right now. Now, if I were to have used, which I actually did, so I'm going to do this a little bit differently for this next version of this card, but I used separate panels for each of these layers. So for the frame, the cashmere colored quatrefoil, the black quatrefoil, and then the inked background, those are all separate layers, and it is quite a thick card. So that might be a little bit too thick. So I thought what I could do is actually start with the card base as my inked panel, and I'll show you how I'm going to tackle that. So Waffle Flower has a grip mat that you might be familiar with. Mine is well loved, and so it's a little bit stained and inked up and whatnot. There is another version, this is the first release of it, and it's just a really nice sticky mat. And then what I'm also using from Waffle Flower are these masking corner stencils. And these are great. They are wonderful for masking off areas of a card if you're ink blending, for example. And rather than having to use sticky notes or low tack tape, but you certainly, or masking paper, you can certainly use all of those things. But I have this in my stash, and I really, really like these. I've used this on one of my other cards as well for World Cardmaking Day. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my card panel and I'm going to ink the panel that is going to be my card front. So what I want to do is mask off the back part of the panel so it doesn't get any ink on it. So let's do it this way. So I'm just going to run my card like this, because this is going to be my front panel. This is my back of my card. And then I'm just going to take my masking stencil and run it right up against the edge of the spine of the card. And I don't have to be too worried about that I'm getting the exact line, because we're going to have this frame that sits over top. So it's going to cover up the very outside edges of my inking anyway. So I'm not too worried about this, but this is a nice way to create a really crisp line without the ink bleeding into the back part of the panel. Okay, so again, the 3 colors that I'm using, I'm going to use Distress Oxide in Pumice Stone, then I'm going to move into Cashmere, and this is by Catherine Pooler, and then the bottom I'm going to use Succulent, and that's going to give me this inked background. Okay, so in terms of the tools that I like to use for blending, with my oxides, I typically use the blending handles and then a domed phone, and you can see this one's well used. It's quite gnawed up. You can use brushes, and then you can also use a really nice big background blender brush. This is a new set from Waffle Flower. I've been playing around with them. I think there was 3 different packs. They come with different colored handles, or you can get the one with just the white, and it is a nice way to lay down a lot of ink if you're doing a background. So I'm going to just start with my Pumice Stone Distress Oxide, and I usually, like I said, use a domed phone when I'm blending, and I'm just going to go ahead and start blending my background. And I'm not going to worry too much at how well this is all blended out, because again, this is the very background. There's going to be a lot of extra layers on top, and so I'm not going to worry about it being a perfect blend. Okay, now I'm going to move into my Cashmere, and I am going to use the big blender brushes. And so they say you should move your, I'm just going to shuffle this over just a little bit here so I have more room, so that my ink pad is sitting on my grip mat from Tim Holtz, which is great, and so you don't have to hold your ink pad, it automatically sticks. So just move it around, and then they do recommend that you just tap off your ink brush a little bit, and then you can lay down your color. It's great for layering, so if you want just a very subtle layer of ink, it works well for that, and then you can build. I'm not tapping off, but I'm not too worried about it again. The Catherine Pooler inks are beautiful to work with if you've never used them before. They dry back really, really nicely, so that you may think, oh, it's a bit of a hot mess when you're first laying down the ink, but I promise you they dry back really, really nice. Okay, so I'm just going to get my colors. I absolutely love this cashmere ink, and I found that it went really well with the terrarium ephemera. So that's why I chose this color. Okay, and I'm just blending into that oxide a little bit to create that transition. And now I'm going to take my succulent color, which I thought was kind of cool because we used little succulent ephemera, and the same idea. So I'm just moving my ink brush around into that ink, tap it off a little bit. And then lay down my color. And I did this layer first because I do want my ink to dry on my cardstock. Again, it may look like a bit of a hot mess, but don't worry, I promise you, it will blend out really nicely. And I'm going to go back over top with the cashmere just to work on that blend a little bit. And again, we're going to have lots of layers over top, so I'm not going to worry about this being a perfect blend. Okay. Very earthy, neutral tones here to go along with our little succulents in the terrarium. Okay, I love Catherine Pooler inks. They're so beautiful. Let's move all of that to the side. Okay, then we can pull that up, and you can see just what a nice clean line that stencil provided for us. Okay, so that's why I do really enjoy using the grip mat and the combination with this stencil. You wouldn't have to use a grip mat, but it's nice because I don't have to tape anything down. You can see how well it's stuck, and as you press you can see that adhesion there, and it just peels off really well. So great little package. The masking stencils does come with multiple stencils inside, so it's great depending on what size that you're masking off, etc. Fun little set of stencils there. Okay, now on the background of our original card, you can see there's this pierced detail, and that's what the Quatrefoil texture die provides. So that's this one. And you can see there's actually no cutting edge along this, which is great for multiple reasons. So it's just going to add some texture to whatever panel that you're using, but you can also shift it so that if you're using a larger piece of cardstock, there's no edges that are going to cut. So you can continue the pattern by continuing to to run this through your die cut machine. It's just going to create the pierced pattern. It's not pierced such that it actually creates holes that you could thread, for example. It's not an actual piercing die. It just creates that really cool texture. Okay, so that's what I'm going to do now. I'm actually going to run this through my die cutting machine, and I'm going to line it up so that the front of my card is lined up with the piercing pattern. We'll see if this works. I didn't do this on my first card, as I said, but I think this should work. And again, the very outer edges of my card panel are going to be covered with that frame, so I'm not too worried. I just want to make sure that the inside portion of my card has this texture on it. Okay, so I'm just going to run that just like that as a sandwich through my die cutting machine, because of course this is not as wide as the opening in my die cutting machine, so I will be able to feed it through that way. Okay, so there you can see that I have just created that cool pattern on my card front, and I didn't have to add an extra layer. I just did it directly to my card front. Now the back side will have some piercing on it, so if you don't enjoy that look, then perhaps you don't want to do this, but I was just doing it so that I wouldn't have too much bulk on my card, given that we are using multiple layers of other die cut pieces. But I'm okay with my inside of my card having that pierced panel. It's kind of cool, actually. Okay, so I'm just going to set that off to the side, let it continue to dry, and we can move on to one of the next steps. Okay. Now, I did do a little bit of work ahead of time, again, in the interest of time, and I'm assuming everybody knows how to die cut. So what I did was I took the quatrefoil panel die, this one here, and I die cut it from black cardstock. And then what I had done was I took one of my 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch panels, and I inked it up in just the cashmere ink. And with Catherine Pooler inks, what's really nice is you can literally just open the ink pad and swipe it down your cardstock, and super duper fast. You'll get full coverage, and like I said, when it dries back, it's going to dry back really, really beautifully, so you don't have to worry about streaks or anything like that. And then what I did was I die cut that cashmere panel out of the quatrefoil as well, so that I ended up with 2 quatrefoil panels. Okay, because on the card you can see that there's both the cashmere and then the black. And what I wanted to demonstrate was that you can stretch your supplies by re-envisioning them a little bit. So by shifting them, you can see that we get a really interesting pattern. So let me just show you on a piece of cardstock so you can actually see that better. So you could have one, which is really pretty, or you can add a second piece and have this additional layer of interest. So that's what I chose to do. Now you will notice that on my black piece, I've cut the edge off, and that's because when I shift, it's actually going to create a little bit more width to my card than what my front panel is going to be. So I just had to trim that down, and I also did trim the cashmere one slightly, so you'll see this edge is slightly narrower than this far left edge. So again, just trim down each of those panels. So what I'm going to do now is I'm actually going to glue them together. This is a little bit tedious because of course there's not a lot of edges, but just bear with me while I do this. I do have my Sweet Petunia glue press, which makes it nice because it does have a nice, sorry, where am I here? A nice fine nozzle, so I can get into these more intricate dies a little bit easier. And just going to, patience is the key here. While it seems really tedious, it does make a difference so that you get good coverage, because you don't want your die cut pieces to not adhere together. absolutely love this collection from Waffle Flower. And then they did come out with another, a different pattern, but same idea. So it's got the panel die, and then it's got the texture die, which just creates the piercings, sorry. And so you can use them separate, you can use them together, but how beautiful. I think it's just gorgeous. You could do a really beautiful ink blended, multicolor ink blended panel, and then die cut it, and then options are endless here. Love it. Oops. Okay, let's see if that's enough. Okay, now what we're going to do is we're going to have the black panel shifted over to the right slightly. Okay, so we're going to line up the bottom. Maybe I'll stick another piece of white paper just so it's a little bit easier to see. It's a little bit finicky doing this, but I promise it's worth it. It's just such a cool effect. And you could shift it vertically, you could shift it left instead of right. Obviously there's options there, but so that wasn't too painful trying to do that. But isn't that neat? I just think that's really cool. Just wipe up any extra glue bits that are around there, tidy it up. But I thought that was really an interesting way of using our die cut pieces. Okay. And now if you don't have a background die like this, think of using an embossing folder. You could stencil a background, anything to just create a nice subtle pattern in the background. The scale of this works nicely with the ephemera piece that I was using, so I thought that was a really nice panel die. But you don't have to use that if you don't have that in your stash. You can use whatever you have. Like I said, an embossing folder would be really beautiful as well. Okay. Now, again, one of the other things that I did off camera was I created the frame, and that sits on top of our card front. And that was using the inked cashmere A2 size panel. So having taken this, inked it up with my cashmere ink, and then what I did was I took my Spellbinders dies and I created this frame. And so what it is the outside frame, this is the largest of the frame, the fluted rectangle piece here, which actually doesn't cut, it just creates that really beautiful fluted edging. And then the inside die, which will help create the actual, cut out the actual frame. Okay, so what I like to do, and I demonstrated this on one of my other videos, is I would lay down the outside die first on my cardstock piece. I would tape that down, then I would lay the next layer, the fluted layer, inside of that and tape it down, because they tend to move around, right? And so it's just a little bit easier when you have them taped down and adhered so they're not going to move. And then I would put that third die cutting piece, rectangle, inside, tape that down, and then run it through my die cutting machine, and you'll end up with this really neat frame. Okay, and like I said, there's another set of similar framed dies in the store, the linear touch rectangles and tag etched dies, that will give you this same effect. So it's really cool as well. Okay, so we have our frame, we've got our background done. And okay, then when you have your panel, this, and actually what you could do is not ink your panel, just leave it as white, and the middle section of your frame you can use to create this little panel that goes on the front side of your card. So, and then you could ink out your frame separately, and again, just apply your Catherine Pooler ink or whatever ink you're using directly to the frame to color it, and then you can separately ink out here. Now, I did use two different inks. I used my pumice stone as well as the cashmere You don't have to do that. It's a little bit of variation in color, but if you wanted it just to be cashmere, you wouldn't have to worry about inking them separately. You could just ink your whole panel, cut out the frame, use the inside portion to cut out this piece, which I'm using the Emerald Cut Labels die, this one here, to cut out this piece. So again, I did that ahead of time. It's up to you. I just chose to have a little bit of variation of my color there. And then what I did with this piece was, again, I used the Quatrefoil panel so that, or texture die, sorry, so that I could get this same texture on this little piece. And so there's a bit of continuity. So the very background has the piercing, and then this layered hexagon has that same piercing. So it's just a bit of continuity, okay? But what I wanted to show you with this piece was I actually added some clear embossing powder to this piece here. And it just, again, highlights it because we're trying to draw our eye into the focal point, which is a sentiment in this beautiful ephemera. So I'll show you what I did. It's very simple. I took my piece and literally just took my Versamark ink, which is sticky ink, and applied it directly to my stamped, or my inked little piece here. And then I took my clear embossing powder and just applied that directly. And then I'm going to heat set it off to the side here. Oops, sorry. Just grabbed my tweezers so I can hold just in the corner so that I don't burn my fingers, but it's not taking up a lot of space on my panel. And there you can see now that has a little bit of sheen to it. So just a little extra detail. Don't have to do it, but I thought it was kind of fun to add that. All right, so now we have that piece taken care of. And then you'll see on the original card, I backed this centerpiece with just a piece of black cardstock. Now there is no die to give me that, so I literally just had put this down and then I fussy cut around the outside to give me that frame. So easy enough to do. I'm just going to adhere those two layers together. I just felt like this little ink blended piece didn't stand out against the background, and so I just needed a way to make it pop a little bit more, and that little fine border was just enough. And again, the black also ties in with that Quatrefoil panel die that we've got there, so these are the okay. And then I'm just going to set acrylic block on that to get that to set. Okay. Now, one of the other things I did ahead of time was I applied glossy accents to the ephemera piece. So this is a terrarium, so we know that this portion would be glass in real life. So I wanted to mimic that, and so I thought using glossy accents would be really neat. Now on my original card, I actually used Nouveau crystal drops in Morning Dew. And so they're actually very different look. You can see on the original, this is more of a milky kind of clouded look, which I think is really pretty. It's a very ethereal feeling. Whereas the glossy accents is more vibrant. It changes the coloring of the ephemera a little bit, the florals, but still really beautiful, just different, that's all. So I thought I'd show you that what the effects are with both. Now with the Simply Stated ephemera, which we love the Simply Stated line, it's printed on 80-pound cardstock, so it takes heat embossing really well. I've actually gone ahead and I've created or just cut out from some scrap cardstock a few extra layers just to give it a little bit more dimension when it's sitting on my card, but it didn't warp or anything having that glossy accents on there. I just added the backing just for a little bit more dimension. So that was really great. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to adhere that onto this little piece at the front. Sorry, give me one moment here. Okay. Okay, I'm just going to center this the best we can. Just use my little T-square ruler to get that base somewhat straight. It's a little bit tricky because it's curved, but I think that looks good. Put that on there for a second. Okay. Now we can add our frame to our die cut background here. So we're literally just going to add glue to the edges and adhere our frame. Now, if you wanted a little bit of extra structure to this frame piece, you could always have die cut two pieces of cardstock together, and then you get the exact same size frame. I did that in another card that I had created, but one is fine because we've got quite a bit of layer going on in this card already, so I didn't want to add that much more dimension. But you can see that with having trimmed the black quatrefoil panel, that it is covered in its entirety with this frame. Just gonna get rid of some of this extra glue. Okay. So there we go. I just think that's a really, really nice way to create a background, is having a frame, because it almost feels like a piece of art with this beautiful ephemera, right? So we want to frame it and highlight it. So I thought that was fun. Okay, now we can go back to our card base. So you can see it's dried back, and I'm going to fold it along my score line here. Now we can add our front. Now in an ideal world, I would have the little pierced lined up with the openings there, but I'm not going to fuss with it too much, given that we did our inking and piercing directly onto our card base. It's a little bit trickier to make sure that that lines up, but the idea is just to have some more interest in that background. Okay, so I'm just going to glue my panel on. So again, you could use a really interesting or just whatever embossing folder to create a background. You don't have to do this type of a die cut pattern if you don't have that in your stash right now, but these are beautiful patterns to have. I think they're really versatile. You can imagine using them for many different occasions of cards. Okay, now we're just going to lay this on top. There we go. Isn't that pretty? I just thought that was really nice. So much lovely detail on there. Okay, and now we can add this piece on. I'm just adding glue. I'm just going to grab my T-square ruler, make sure that we're centered here. Okay, perfect. That's it there for a second. And then the last piece is just our sentiment. So I've backed it with a little bit of cardstock strips just to give it a little bit more structure. And then what I like to do is, because there's a bit of a white edge on the sentiment itself, and I don't have a lot of white in my card, I just like to take a dauber, finger dauber, apply some black ink, but you could use whatever color neutral inks because there's lots of neutrals in here. And I just want to ink it up to take away that white edge. Do you have to do this? Absolutely not. It creates a little bit more depth around the sentiment as well, which ties in again to our black border, the black quatrefoil die cut in the background. Okay, so just a little detail, but sometimes these really add some interest and make a difference. Okay, and then we're going to glue our sentiment onto the card. You can see in the original. I don't want to interrupt some of the detail of the succulents. I think that's just so adorable. I love this ephemera so much. Again, this is the Floral Academia Terrarium ephemera, and then the sentiment is from the Floral Academia Essentials ephemera pack. So many great ones. Okay. It's hard covering up any of that ephemera. It's just so pretty. Okay. That looks pretty good. And I added that extra cardstock pieces behind that sentiment because it is just suspended on the side, so you don't want it warping or curling or anything like that. Even though it is 80-pound cardstock, you just want it to lay nice and flat. Okay, and there you go. There is our A2 size card with a lot of interest, a lot of dimension. We've got shine, so much going on here, but at the same time, just a very simple, sweet card. With this collection of papers, they all go together obviously so well, and what a beautiful little card set that would be to give to a friend. Just a very general thinking about you, joy is the heart's true nature is a lovely sentiment. So thanks for watching. Hope you've been inspired, and I hope you enjoy watching all the rest of the wonderful card designs that have been released today as well. Take care.